Square versus Blizzard, Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft. These two games are often compared, contrasted, and equally attacked and shit on by each other's player bases. Both games have had their highs and lows, and it's no secret that right now, Final Fantasy XIV is currently experiencing what is probably its lowest point in its existence, if you don't count 1.0, that is. I myself have done several videos comparing the two over the years, but comparing the systems, server tick, raids, PvP, etc. are not what I'm going to do in this video. Instead, I'm going to point out what I believe are the major mistakes that Square has or is making that are exactly the same mistakes Blizzard's made. And most importantly, the main design philosophy that is the prime cause of Final Fantasy XIV's current situation. And the kicker is that it happens to be the polar opposite problem that caused WoW's lows and, strangely enough, its highs as well. So where does Final Fantasy XIV land on this? Let's do the drop and find out.
I am Razio.
First, let's take a look at some of the major mistakes that both companies have made. There are two major ones that I want to focus on, as they by far and away had the most impact on the games themselves. Number one is the homogenization of their class systems, and number two is not listening to player feedback about proposed and implemented changes. Now, homogenization is a surefire way to make any game with RPG character building elements dull as fucking dishwater. In almost every instance that homogenization takes place, the developers always carry along with it the excuse of it was done for the sake of accessibility and simplicity. And let that sink in for a moment. Those two terms, accessibility and simplicity, really sound like a whole lot of fun and what people are looking for, right? What it really boils down to, once you cut away the corporate speak, is the following. It was done to attempt to get more people from all other genres to play the game, and so even a paraplegic baby with no arms could understand it. And that means more subscribers and less work for the developers to actually balance the game and make it interesting. That is really what it boils down to. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, one of the funnest parts of any RPG, be it MMO, ARPG, or hell, even JRPG, are the RPG-esque elements that are in these games that allow you to build your character more uniquely to yourself, find a playstyle that suits you, and differentiates yourself from the other players in the game, and in some genres even flat out break the game. This is known as theory crafting among the gaming community. Both Blizzard and Square made this terrible mistake. In WoW, we saw the talent tree shrink in Cataclysm and eventually go to the boring-ass 6-line system in Mists of Pandaria. Every tank was given self-healing, every DPS was given tank-level survivability, and every healer was given high-functioning DPS kits over the years on top of insane defensives, i.e. everyone had to be able to do everything. Unique class buffs were shared across multiple classes. Hybrid classes and support roles were mostly neutered from being the jack of all trades, master of none, into just a master of all. To follow suit, Final Fantasy XIV removed DPS stances from tanks, cross-class skills were removed, job actions were severely simplified, such as, the RNG elements streamlined in Astrologian's card system. Black Mage had adjustments made where MP management was no longer really required. A complete overhaul of the summoner job made it less complex, but also more similar to other casters in its rotation and resource management. The machinist was simplified to a degree where its rotation became less distinctive compared to other ranged physical DPS jobs. Cleric stance was removed in Stormblood. It used to switch a healer's stats between healing and damage, which was a core mechanic for healers, until it was deemed too complex for the game's intended accessibility. Jobs have even been given more similar utility abilities, especially for tanks and healers, which each job in a role now tends to have a similar set of mitigation and healing tools, making them more interchangeable in most content. You see a pattern here? Just like in World of Warcraft, over time, there's been a clear shift towards ensuring that all jobs in 14 within a role are balanced such that no single job is strictly better or worse in content, leading to more uniform job design where differences are often in the flavor rather than the function. But here's the kicker. Even the flavor fell victim to this type of bullshit, as we can clearly see from the meme in Final Fantasy XIV that every job is virtually a DPS now with a different colored icon next to their name. Every class or job being an essentially functioning similarly as possible is not game balance. It essentially just means your choice of class or job doesn't matter at all, and what you are choosing is what animations you see when you press buttons. It also gets so much worse when you look into other job and non-job related things that Square has axed from the game over the years. I'll give you some examples. Stat point allocations were removed in Stormblood in the summer of 2017. Before this, players had to manually allocate stat points when leveling, which was replaced by just an automatic stat increase. TP points eliminated with Shadowbringers, in 2019. TP was used, for physical attacks, but was removed to simplify combat mechanics, with magic points, MP, becoming the primary resource for all classes. While not entirely removed, the role of Strength Materia was significantly altered or phased out in terms of its universal applicability, especially with its removal of stat point allocation. The protective spell was removed in Shadowbringers to reduce the necessity of pre-fight buffs, simplifying healer roles. Elemental values, and this one digs back a bit, but the system where weapons had elemental properties was removed right before the launch of A Realm Reborn in 2013. In the original version of 14, different elements could impact the effectiveness of attacks based on the enemy's resistances. And a similar thing happened in World of Warcraft, where enemies' resistances were removed. And I see why, because, in fights like Ragnaros, you couldn't be a fire spec mage because you do no damage because he's immune to fire. But you can't help but admit this completely removes, planning and, just a fun, flavorful thing that RPGs used to have. Going back to 14, the belt slot was removed. Another piece of gear was removed in a game where gear is already worthless, with its stats just redistributed among all the other equipment in the game. And this one's not a huge one, but and it's not entirely removed, but the job stones, acquiring and using job stones was simplified over time. In A Realm Reborn, for example, you needed to equip a job stone to access job-specific higher level abilities, which was more or less streamlined in later expansions. But hang on, now we reach the part of this video where the most devout members of the Church of Yoshi P are going to collectively lose their shit.
It's almost like I can hear them just breathing really fucking heavy and just pounding down on their keyboards. Full on caps lock. I'm not fucking around this time.
When it comes to feedback on these issues, Blizzard actually did do some things about this, and I'll be honest. These changes were not just because of player feedback via beta and alpha forums, Reddit, or any other YouTube content creators stuff. Blizzard listened for one major reason. Their sub numbers plummeted, and their pocketbooks were starting to look a little barren as a result. They were forced to listen. After a decade or so of failure after failure and extreme homogenization, all to appease the gods of accessibility and simplicity. Sounds like a slogan for a DEI program.
Sorry, you're cancelled.
Blizzard started to change things back to how they were. In Dragonflight, we saw the return of a new and improved, much more in-depth talent tree system. In War Within, we saw the advent of the hero talent system with further increased class spec identity. We saw many self-heals and self-DR abilities get removed from classes. Healers became more healer-focused and less DPS-focused. We saw changes that made tanks more reliant on the healers, like, in the old WoW days. And we saw the return of tier gear, which was removed in Battle for Azeroth, and more trinkets that had more gameplay-changing effects. Class professions got a complete remake and overhaul as a result, and got their own talent trees and specializations again. Class racials were once again more impactful. For instance, races might now have more potent or situationally useful abilities, re-adding a layer of strategic choice and character creation into the game. And we saw the return of the support class with the Evoker, which was introduced in Dragonflight. Class identity was made clear that it had become a point of focus for Blizzard over the more recent years. Now let's contrast this with Final Fantasy XIV. What has Square done to combat this homogenization problem? Well, as of the making of this video, practically nothing, outside of a promise from Yoshi P, where he stated that he has intentions to continue working on job identity, especially post Dawntrail, to make jobs feel more unique while keeping the game balanced. This includes looking at encounter design to complement job uniqueness. Now, intentions are one thing, but will it actually happen? The question is, with Dawntrail being what many say is the lowest point and the worst expansion in Final Fantasy XIV's history, is this the same turning point that World of Warcraft received back in Shadowlands, where the players were so fed up that it was hurting the company's bottom line, i.e. their money? I mean, I certainly hope so, but I have my doubts. And my doubts are founded on some major issues that Square Enix has in regards to a few things. First of all, player feedback is much more difficult for Square to receive than it is for Blizzard. Why? Because Final Fantasy XIV has never and likely will never have a PTR system, a public test round. Players don't ever get to test or get their hands on alpha or beta versions of expansions, and thus give more useful and meaningful feedback. In fact, the only time players get access to Final Fantasy XIV's expansions before its release is when Square handpicks popular 14 creators to play a pre-release version of it for views and content and hype building. By the time that this happens, the game is mostly finished outside of some number tweaking, and no real meaningful change can come from any feedback received on any aspect of the game. And to be fair, most aspects of the game, such as the MSQ, aren't even tested. It isn't a test so much as it's cheap advertising for Square and their game. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that Square wants to keep things like story and their systems under wraps in this age of data mining everything to the tits, but I just don't see their strategy of keeping everything this tight-knit as a reasonable way to get feedback and fix their games moving forward. But Square and Yoshi P, man, they are stubborn as fuck and refuse to budge in many aspects of the development of Final Fantasy XIV. And this is their major problem. And it happens to be the polar opposite problem of the problem that Blizzard has had over the decades. That was a word salad. You see, Blizzard's major problem is making changes for the sake of change. It is ultimately what caused a lot of WoW's issues over the years. So many things have been changed for no reason other than to change things. The wisdom of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, never really made its way through their thick skulls. Many of WoW's most detrimental changes are a result of this. From, MOP's talent system, common legendaries, the artifact weapons and Azerite armor, and the removal of tier gear, and hit its peak with the Covenant system in Shadowlands. I'm still waiting for fucking Master Loot to be brought back. For fuck's sake, Blizzard, there's no reason this should not be in the game. Anyway, I digress. But funnily enough, despite all the terrible changes Blizz made and has had to revert, as mentioned earlier in this video, the willingness to experiment and change things up and add new major features every expansion, or at least try to, has also resulted in some great things that have stuck around. Things like dragon riding, hero talents, the world quests instead of dailies, solo shuffle, and RBGs in PvP, transmog, time walking, warbands, and delves are some examples. I point all of this out to show you that Final Fantasy XIV has the polar opposite problem. They're stubborn and refuse to change almost anything. They're too afraid to. Outside of changes that are aimed to homogenize and streamline and remove things from the game, Square has dug their heels in on using the exact same formula they have since the release of A Realm Reborn. Every expansion announcement is virtually the same, outside of which, beautiful cinematic they show at every expo. It reads like a checklist every time. New 8-man raids, new 24-man raid, new MSQ, new job or two, occasionally a new race, new beast tribe chains and quest lines, a new landmass and cosmetics, and that's practically it. I've said this before in other videos and on streams, and I'll say it again. If you were to describe to someone what changes are coming in a new Final Fantasy XIV expansion without mentioning any of the visuals you saw in the cinematic shown, and just describe what new features are coming in the expansion, you would be hard-pressed to know what expansion they were actually talking about. Whether it's because of pure stubbornness on Yoshi P's part or it's orders from those above him is irrelevant. The fact remains that Square, by and large, refuses to deviate from a formula that, in my humble opinion, no longer serves them. You see, in any creative medium, whether it be film, directing, acting, painting, writing, game design, there is a general rule that must be remembered and adhered to. The rule is this: you must be willing to kill your baby. I just made a ton of liberal white women wet as
What? What the fuck?
What this statement means is when you are creating something, you can't be married to a concept or an idea, no matter how brilliant you, as the creator of it, may think it is. You have to listen to feedback and be willing to get rid of ideas you have had or formulas you've followed. You have to remember that at the end of the day, especially with mediums like film and video games and book writing, that you're making something that you want to sell, which means you have to compromise and adapt your vision as much as possible, or required, I should say, or kill parts of it completely if you want it to be successful and profitable. While what your audience wants and expects isn't all-encompassing, it still matters greatly. It will ultimately doom whatever project you are working on if you refuse to budge on anything. And as I recently pointed out, if we look at the pattern and formula that Yoshi P and his team have taken on 14 over the years, you will see very little change and deviation. Every expansion is the same, system-wise. Risks are rarely, if ever, taken, and they have no real way of receiving and acting on feedback during development. So I direct the question that I asked a few moments earlier back to all of you watching this video. Is Dawntrail Final Fantasy XIV's Shadowlands moment, where the money talks and makes them change, or will Square double down in the future as they've always done and just homogenize and streamline the game even further? Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts and feelings. Yours down below. Guys, I really appreciate all the support that I've been getting over the last few months. If you like my video, please like, share them. It helps a lot more than you know. If you don't, that's fine. Thumbs down it and, just tell me to hang myself. It's fine. I've heard worse. But remember, guys, I do stream every Monday, Wednesday is Saturday at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I throw in other days if something comes up, but we're playing a lot of different games right now. So come shoot the shit. Remember, just a follow is totally fine. You don't need to give me any money. I don't do this for money. I do it because I love doing it. I love interacting with you guys. And quite frankly, I don't have anything else to do. So yeah, my life's that pathetic. But thanks, guys, for hanging out. Comments down below. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the current dilemma of what's going on with Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. And what's been happening also in WoW, as it's been changing quite drastically over the last few years. Comments down below, guys. Take care of yourselves. And as always, my friends, keep it real.